The bank manager dismissed her, insulted her, and called her useless, not realizing she was the CEO of the company keeping his branch alive. It was a Wednesday morning in late April when Danielle Mercer stepped into the Century Union Bank branch in Little Rock, Arkansas. She was wearing a navy blazer, dark jeans, and a pair of plain black flats. No jewelry, no flashy handbag, nothing that screamed status. Just a simple tote bag slung over her shoulder with a laptop, a notebook, and a pen that had long since run out of ink, but she still liked the feel of. To anyone watching, she looked like someone running a quick errand before heading into the office. And that was exactly what she wanted. Danielle wasn't there to make a scene. She wasn't there to be recognized. She was there because 3 separate complaints had been quietly flagged in the company's monthly report. Minor things, on the surface: delays in business wire transfers, rude staff behavior, unreturned calls, all tied to this particular branch. And since it happened to be 10 minutes from her second apartment, she figured she'd check it out herself. As she stepped inside, she scanned the space. Clean floors, tidy counters, muted tones, a little too quiet. A customer filled out a deposit slip at the kiosk. A young man stood waiting in line with a check in hand. The 2 tellers behind the glass barely looked up. Danielle walked to the front desk where a woman in her mid-40s sat, typing something with exaggerated slowness. "Hi there," Danielle said, her tone friendly but firm. "Is the branch manager available?" The woman glanced up, eyes flickering to Danielle's face, then her clothes. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm with Richston Holdings. Just need a few minutes." The woman hesitated, then picked up the phone and dialed an extension. "Somebody from one of the account clients. She says she needs a few minutes," she murmured, covering the receiver with her palm as if Danielle couldn't hear her anyway. A minute later, the branch manager walked out from the side office. Ronald Stratton, mid-50s, khaki slacks with a light blue button-down and the kind of tie you wear because you have to. His expression was polite, but thin. "Ma'am, we're quite booked today," he said as he approached, not offering a handshake. "What exactly do you need?" Danielle offered a smile. "I wanted to check in on some recent feedback we've gotten about this location. A few of the business services flagged delays and—" "Hold on," Ronald said, holding up a hand like he was stopping traffic. "You said you're from Richston?" "Yes," she answered. "And they sent you here to check on us?" "Just me today. I manage—" "So they sent you." He gave a small laugh under his breath, more to himself than to her. "All right, well, what kind of delays are we talking about?" Danielle's smile didn't fade, but her voice dropped half a notch. "A couple of issues with the business wire process, a lack of response to client calls. Things like that. Well, those aren't under my direct control," he said quickly. "We're understaffed and overregulated. Most of these complaints come from people who don't understand how banking works." His tone was sharper now, defensive. She wasn't even sure he was talking to her anymore. "I get that, but these were pretty specific cases," Danielle said, trying again. "And since Richston moves a lot of volume through this branch, we thought—" "Let me stop you right there," Ronald said, waving a dismissive hand. "Look, I've been in this business 30 years. I know when people are trying to micromanage something they don't understand. No offense, but this isn't a daycare center. We don't need random employees showing up with checklists." He turned slightly, adjusting his tie, then muttered something under his breath. Danielle wasn't sure she heard it right. But then he said it again, louder this time, like he wanted it to land. "Figures they'd send the useless one?" Everything in the lobby froze for half a second. A young teller behind the glass paused mid-scan of a check, eyes flicking toward them. A man in line looked up, brow furrowed. Danielle stared at Ronald, her expression calm. Not blank, not hurt, just still. She took a slow breath. "I'd like to speak to the regional director," she said evenly. "Today, if possible." But Ronald laughed, dry and sarcastic. "And I'd like a vacation home in Naples. Let me guess, you want a coffee while you wait too?" Danielle opened her tote bag. Quietly. No rush. She pulled out a sleek black business card case, flipped it open, and handed him a card with her name in embossed lettering across the top. He stared at it, then looked up at her, then stared at it again. CEO, Richton Holdings Group, Danielle Mercer. But before he could speak, the silence between them had already said enough. Ronald's mouth hung open just slightly. He didn't blink. The only thing that moved was the card in his hand. Subtle tremble, like it suddenly weighed more than it should have. His eyes traced her name again, as if hoping some fine print would tell him this was all a misunderstanding. But Danielle said nothing. She didn't rush to explain, didn't clarify. She just let him sit in that moment, in the very room where he'd decided she was beneath his time. He started, the sound barely leaving his throat. You're the CEO? She gave a single nod. Calm, controlled, still not angry. She didn't need to be. From behind the counter, the younger teller, a woman maybe in her late 20s, lowered her eyes awkwardly and pretended to be typing something, though her screen hadn't changed. The man waiting in line stepped aside, quietly pulling out his phone as if pretending to scroll, but clearly following what was happening. Danielle gestured toward the office doors. Shall we? Ronald blinked again. Right. Yes, of course. This way. He turned and led her toward the glass-paneled conference room, but his usual stride had vanished. It wasn't confident anymore. It was slow, cautious, like he'd forgotten how to walk with purpose. He fumbled the handle slightly before opening the door for her. Once inside, Danielle sat, crossing one leg over the other. Ronald stayed standing. I want to clarify something, he began, forcing a laugh that didn't fit. Obviously, I didn't realize who you were. I thought, well, honestly, I assumed you were from one of the satellite teams. You assumed a lot, she said, her voice still level. He chuckled again, nervous this time. It's not personal. We get people in here all the time claiming to be from headquarters. Usually they want things that don't even fall under our scope. They don't get the pressure we're under, the red tape. She raised her hand just a little. He stopped mid-sentence. I'm not here to argue about pressure, Ronald, she said. I came in because we received specific complaints. They weren't from random clients. They were from 3 of our top-tier partners who've banked with us for years. You may not realize it, but this branch handles nearly 30% of Richton's wire transfers. When that stops running smoothly, it matters. He swallowed hard. Danielle leaned forward slightly, not threatening, just clear. And then, instead of taking 5 minutes to listen, you decided to size me up based on how I looked. You interrupted me 3 times, then you called me useless, in front of your staff, in front of customers. His eyes dropped to the table. I didn't mean it like that, he mumbled. But you said it, she replied. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was exact, precise, a stillness that required no explanation. Ronald fidgeted, adjusting his sleeves, then smoothing down his tie again, though it wasn't out of place. I'd like to speak with your regional director before noon, Danielle said, checking her watch. You'll call and make that happen. I'll wait here. He nodded quickly. Yes, of course. And Ronald? He looked up. Going forward, assume everyone who walks through that door deserves your respect, regardless of their title. Ronald nodded again, but there was nothing left in his eyes but confusion. Shame and ego were fighting it out behind his face, and shame was losing. Danielle leaned back in the chair, opened her tote again, and pulled out a notepad. She began writing calmly, without looking at him. He stood there for another few seconds before stepping out and gently pulling the glass door closed behind him. Outside the room, the energy had changed. The front desk staff wasn't pretending anymore. The tellers had seen and heard enough to understand what just happened. Nobody was talking, but eyes were meeting. People were connecting dots. Back inside, Danielle's pen scratched across the page. She wasn't writing anything important, just notes to keep her hands busy. She didn't need to report the disrespect. She was the report. But what she didn't know yet was that her presence had stirred more than just one manager's nerves. Someone else in the branch had been waiting for a moment like this. 10 minutes passed. Ronald hadn't returned yet. Through the glass wall, Danielle could see him on the far side of the branch, phone pressed tight to his ear, pacing in short, anxious loops near the printer station. He wasn't talking anymore, just listening, and nodding to no one. A few minutes later, a soft knock tapped against the conference room door. It wasn't Ronald. It was the younger teller, light brown curls pulled into a loose bun, name tag slightly crooked, hands nervously clasped in front of her. "Hi," she said softly, standing in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt. I didn't want to let the moment pass without saying something." Danielle looked up. "Go ahead." "I'm Renee Mathis," the teller said. "I've only been here 6 months. I was right there when Mr. Stratton said what he said. And honestly, it wasn't the first time. He talks like that, to women, to younger staff, to anyone he thinks won't push back." Danielle didn't react. She let Renee speak. "I didn't say anything earlier because, well, I need this job," she continued, eyes flicking toward the hallway. "But the way you handled it? Quiet, calm, direct. That was something I haven't seen before. You didn't yell. You didn't flex. You just held your ground." And he folded. Danielle smiled slightly. "I didn't need to raise my voice." Renee stepped in a little further. "If anyone from HR or corporate does a follow-up, I'll talk. I've got stories. There are others too. They're just scared. He plays favorites. Uses tone as a weapon. Acts like we're beneath him." Danielle nodded. "Thank you for telling me. You weren't obligated to. I guess I just wanted to say, you made me feel like I wasn't crazy for noticing." There was a beat of silence between them, a quiet current of something honest. Then Renee stepped back out into the lobby. Danielle leaned back in her chair, watching her walk away. She wasn't surprised. Disappointed, sure, but not surprised. She had seen it play out before, at conferences, in client meetings, during hiring panels. The assumptions, the tone changes, the sideways comments wrapped in fake smiles. The difference was, this time, it was so casual, so public, as if Ronald had done it 100 times before without consequence. But this time, he'd picked the wrong person. The door opened again. Ronald stepped inside, a little more subdued now. His tie was loose. His hand gripped a manila folder like a life raft. "The regional director is available by video call," he said quietly. "They've cleared 15 minutes, starting now." Danielle gave a small nod and rose to her feet. "Good. Set it up." He clicked the monitor on, tapped a few buttons, and soon a window opened on the large screen. A face appeared, mid-40s, dark suit, silver earrings, clean voice. "Good morning," the woman said. "Is this Ms. Mercer?" "It is," Danielle replied. "I'm Teresa Landon, Regional Operations. We weren't expecting you at this branch." "That was the point," Danielle said. Teresa nodded. "Understood." Ronald stood to the side, quiet now, folding into the background like a coat rack. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Danielle stepped forward and spoke clearly into the camera. "There have been issues with this branch, small ones, stacking over time, and today I experienced something firsthand that confirmed a few concerns I've had about the management approach here." Teresa's face didn't flinch. "What kind of concerns?" Danielle glanced toward Ronald, then back. "Inappropriate language, a dismissive attitude, assumptions made about rank and value based on appearance. It wasn't just impolite. It was unprofessional and indicative of deeper problems in culture." Teresa inhaled slowly. "I appreciate your transparency. I'll begin a review immediately. Can you remain on site for the next 30 minutes? I'd like to schedule preliminary interviews with some of the staff if they're willing." "I'll be here," Danielle said. Ronald looked up then. "May I?" But she cut him off with a glance. Not now. He looked down. But the quiet in that room wasn't empty. It was charged. And for Ronald, it was just the beginning of consequences he never expected to face. Danielle didn't need to speak to Ronald again. Not right now. She remained seated in the conference room while staff were quietly pulled aside for individual interviews via webcam with Teresa Landon's team. One by one they entered, nervous, cautious. But the longer it went on, the clearer it became that something had been lifted. Like a door cracked open after years of being stuck. First came Renee, then the assistant manager, Kendall Rhodes, who'd been silently enduring for over a year. Then a part-time employee from the operations desk who shared that she'd stopped offering suggestions in team meetings because Ronald always made her feel stupid in front of others. Each story came with a different tone, a different hurt. But the pattern, that was loud. Danielle remained quiet through it all, taking mental notes. Not just about Ronald, but about the people, their courage, their restraint. How many had swallowed moments like the one she'd just lived through and convinced themselves it was better not to speak? A knock broke her focus. It was Ronald. Again. This time, he didn't wait for permission. He opened the door and stepped in, holding a ceramic mug filled with water, hands shaking just enough for her to notice. "May I?" he asked, voice low. She didn't answer, but didn't stop him either. He set the mug on the table, then sat down across from her like a man still trying to find a script. "I know an apology doesn't mean much right now," he began, "but I owe you one." Danielle looked at him directly. "Is that because I'm the CEO, or because I'm a person?" He paused. "Both. That second one should have been enough." He nodded, but there was a tightness in his throat he couldn't swallow down. "I've worked my whole life to get to where I am," he continued. "And I've seen this industry chew people up. It's easy to get cold." "That's not cold, Ronald. That's something else." He looked at her then, like maybe for the first time. Not at her clothes, not at her skin, not at her voice. Just her. "I misjudged you," he said. "Worse than that, I disrespected you. And the truth is, I probably do that more often than I realize." Danielle said nothing for a moment. Then she asked calmly, "Why do you think that is?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. "You want the truth," he said finally. "Because I've always gotten away with it. Because nobody checked me. Because sometimes I see someone walk in and I assume they're not in charge. And if I'm being real, I assumed even less the second I saw you." The honesty in that moment was ugly, raw, but it was real. Danielle leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You think being in this business for 30 years gives you permission to coast? To cut people down because you're tired? If that's the case, you should have left 10 years ago. No one forced you to stay." "I know." "No, I don't think you do. Because if you did, you'd understand this isn't about me. You've been managing people, mentoring people, and you've made them feel small for a long time. That doesn't go away with one apology." He looked down, silent. Danielle stood up and reached for her bag. "There's a review coming. You already know that. Whether you stay in this role or not, I hope you actually start hearing people. Because this position, it's not a crown. It's a mirror. And everything you are shows up in it." Ronald didn't look at her as she walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back one last time. Respect isn't about rank. It's about how you show up when you think no one's watching. But while Ronald sat alone in that room, the rest of the branch was already shifting. Staff finally allowed to breathe a little deeper. And that change had just begun. By Friday morning, the bank's regional office had dispatched 2 senior evaluators to the Little Rock branch. They weren't there to smile or shake hands. They were there with clipboards, files, and a list of staff they needed to speak with. Danielle didn't return that day, but her presence was still felt in every hallway, every cubicle. People who had once whispered their frustrations now found themselves being asked directly about their experiences. And for the first time in a long time, they told the truth. The evaluators, Charlene Booth and Marcus Lee, spent most of the day tucked in an office at the back of the branch, calling employees in one by one. The interviews weren't confrontational. They weren't aggressive. Just honest, deliberate. And it didn't take long for a pattern to form. Ronald Stratton's name came up in almost every conversation. Not as a manager who made tough decisions or held people accountable, but as someone who punished ideas, dismissed suggestions, and only respected those who looked or sounded like him. Kendall, the assistant manager, shared how Ronald once made a comment about her overreaching when she suggested a new client process, even though her idea later became standard at another branch. She'd been pushed to the background ever since. Another staff member, Brandon Poe, said Ronald regularly called him kid, even though he was 34 and had a decade of experience in finance. When Brandon tried to address it, Ronald laughed it off and told him to toughen up. Even the janitorial staff weighed in, quietly, respectfully, but with years of observation. By mid-afternoon, it was clear to Charlene and Marcus, this wasn't just one bad moment, this was a culture problem, and Ronald was at the center of it. Meanwhile, back at Richston's headquarters, Danielle sat in her office, reviewing the summary notes from Teresa. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply underlined names. The people who spoke up, the people who kept things moving despite poor leadership. The people who deserved to be seen. She picked up the phone. "Kendall Rhodes," she said. "Bring her in for a meeting next week. Quietly. Let's see what she's capable of without that weight on her back." That afternoon, Ronald was called into a video meeting with both Charlene and Marcus, along with a third executive from HR. He sat stiffly in the same conference room where Danielle had handed him her card, this time with his shoulders lower and his voice more controlled. They didn't yell. They didn't accuse. They showed him transcripts. Statements. A timeline. It wasn't just Danielle's story anymore. It was dozens. Ronald tried to push back at first. "I've dedicated my life to this place," he said. "I've never had a serious write-up. This is all being blown out of proportion." Charlene leaned forward. "Ronald, this isn't just one moment. This is a pattern. We're not evaluating your feelings. We're evaluating your behavior." "And your position?" Marcus added. "Doesn't give you immunity from consequences. It raises the bar." There was a long pause. Then the final words. "We're placing you on leave, effective immediately. A decision about your permanent status will follow after the final report is completed." Ronald didn't argue. He gathered his things quietly, walked past his team without a word, and exited the branch through the side door. No speech, no defense, just the sound of a door clicking shut behind him. Inside, the branch didn't erupt with cheers or high fives. It didn't need to. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not nervous. Just clear. Like fresh air after a long storm. But Danielle knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the start. And for the people still working inside that building, change wasn't just coming. It had already arrived. The following Monday, the branch looked almost the same from the outside. Same brick facade, same blue and silver signage, same faint buzz of morning activity as doors unlocked at 8:55 a.m. sharp. But something had shifted. It wasn't visible, not exactly. It was in how people moved, how they greeted each other, how they took their time speaking. Kendall Rhodes had been named interim branch manager. No big announcement, just a quiet handover and a new nameplate placed outside the office door. Her posture had changed too, not stiffer, not more rigid, just steadier, like someone finally given room to stand up straight. Danielle arrived just before noon. She didn't announce it. She walked in like she had the week before, tote bag on her shoulder, simple blazer, low heels. But this time, the energy around her wasn't confusion. It was respect. Kendall met her at the front and shook her hand. "Would you like to talk in my office?" she asked. Danielle nodded. "Let's." Inside they sat down across from each other. A soft lamp hummed in the corner. The walls were plain. The air didn't feel tight. "I wanted to say thank you," Kendall began. "Not just for what happened with Ronald, but for how you handled it. Quietly, decisively. You didn't come in to humiliate him. You came in to check the system." Danielle smiled slightly. "He humiliated himself." Kendall exhaled through her nose, half laugh, half relief. "There's been this culture here, one where if you didn't match a certain mold, your ideas got shelved. You'd get interrupted or sidelined. You start to think it's normal. It's not," Danielle said. "But it's common." Kendall looked down at her desk, then back up. I've got a few ideas I've been sitting on. Ways to improve client service, reduce wait times. I don't want to waste your time. You're not. Danielle pulled a notebook from her tote. Let's hear them. For the next 20 minutes, Kendall walked her through proposals she'd been refining on her own time. Nothing flashy, just real, practical adjustments that showed she understood both the numbers and the people. Danielle listened carefully, asked a few questions, took notes. Not performative ones, real ones, like someone who planned to follow up. When Kendall finished, Danielle said, "If you'd had the right support from the start, these would already be in place." "Maybe," Kendall replied. "But maybe it took the wrong person stepping aside to let the right things through." Danielle didn't smile this time. She nodded once. "Make the changes. Take the lead. And if anyone tries to drag you back into silence, you let me know." As she stood to leave, Kendall said, "One more thing. What made you come in person last week?" Danielle paused. "I used to work front desk at a branch not too different from this one, before Richstone. I remember what it felt like when higher-ups only saw data and never the people behind it. I told myself if I ever made it to the top, I'd never forget what the bottom looked like." Kendall was quiet for a second, then said, "You kept your promise." Danielle gave her a look. "So will you?" She stepped out of the office and passed by Renee, who offered a small wave from her teller window. Danielle smiled and returned it. As she walked out of the branch and into the sunlight, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady, not because one man had been held accountable, but because a room full of people had finally been heard. But before she drove away, she made one more note in her phone. Check in on Kendall in 6 weeks, because real leadership isn't about showing up once, it's about showing up again. 3 weeks later, Danielle sat alone in a corner booth at Café Monette, a quiet spot tucked between an insurance office and a used bookstore in downtown Little Rock. It was her thinking place. No one knew to look for her there. No emails, no meetings, just a coffee, a pen, and whatever thoughts refused to leave her alone. She scrolled through her phone, rereading Kendall's latest update. Client response time reduced by 22%. 3 new business accounts opened this week. Staff morale higher than it's been in years. Danielle smiled. Not wide, just enough to feel it in her cheeks. The truth was, she hadn't planned for that moment at the bank to become anything bigger. She'd gone in as quietly as she could, expecting to ask a few questions, maybe follow up through the usual channels. But then Ronald opened his mouth, and everything changed. It had reminded her of something her grandfather once told her when she was 12. They were at a gas station outside Texarkana, and the clerk had ignored them for nearly 10 minutes before helping the customer behind them. She'd asked him afterward why he didn't say anything, why he didn't demand better treatment. He had smiled and said, "Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the wind-up before the swing." She never forgot that. Danielle didn't need to yell to be heard. She didn't need to throw her title around to make a point. What she did was pay attention, then move with intent. And in that moment with Ronald Stratton, she hadn't just reacted. She had recalibrated the entire room. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, then set her phone aside and picked up a napkin. Scribbled a thought on it. Power doesn't always walk in shouting. Sometimes it shows up with a pen and waits. It was a lesson not just for Ronald, or for Kendall, or Renee. It was for anyone watching from the sidelines, anyone who's ever been talked over, underestimated, or brushed aside. Because the truth? People will make assumptions. Based on how you look, how you talk, what they think you are. They'll put you in a box you never agreed to stand in, but that's their box, not your boundary. Danielle had no intention of becoming a symbol, but in quietly calling out the behavior, in demanding better without saying more than she had to, she became something else entirely. A reminder that the loudest person in the room isn't always the one in charge. She finished her coffee, folded the napkin, and slipped it into her notebook. Before she left, she called the regional office, left a short message for Teresa Landon. "Tell her thank you," Danielle said, "for listening, for acting fast, and let her know Kendall's doing better than good. She hung up. And as she walked to her car, the weight of the past few weeks didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt necessary. Because leadership isn't about title or salary or sitting at the head of the table. It's about how you treat people when you think you don't need anything from them. It's about how you handle power when no one's watching. So here's the truth. You don't have to shout to make noise. You don't have to fight to be right. But when the moment comes to speak, speak clearly. And when someone tries to tell you who you are, let your actions introduce you instead. Because respect is earned in silence and proven in the echo that follows. If you've ever been overlooked, mislabeled, or talked down to, remember this story. And remember that the room will always feel different once people realize who just walked in. Like, share, and subscribe if this story spoke to something you've lived through. And never forget, what people assume about you says more about them than it ever will about you.